Good afternoon. I'm going to begin. Thank you for coming. Thank you to UKTI for inviting me to talk today about Letterland's journey into the US market. So before I begin, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Tom Wendon. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing at Letterland. I'm responsible for all things relating to sales and marketing around the world. And what I thought I'd do before I properly begin is just talk about what I'm going to talk about now. And I'll begin by just talking about what Letterland is as a company, what we do, a little bit about our products. And then I've just got 6 of some top tips that we've learned along the way that relate to exporting to the US, but they also relate to exporting to other countries around the world as well. So although some of the examples would be specific to the US, they do relate to other countries. And then there'll be an opportunity at the end if you want to ask any questions. There'll be a short time to do that. So if we begin by talking about what Letterland is, Letterland itself is a phonics and literacy system for teaching children aged 3 to 8. So in English terms, or UK terms, it's Key Stage 1, Year 1 and 2, and also early years. We've been around for over 45 years, nearly 50 years now. We sell our teaching materials. It's a teaching system, a phonics system, teacher's guides, software, apps, games, cards, flashcards, around the world in over 100 countries to date. And Letterland, the teaching system, was developed by Wendon, who is my grandmother, and there's a photo of her there. She was a special needs teacher 45 years ago in the UK, and she was helping struggling students, struggling children. They were struggling with learning the sounds of the English language and learning to read, write and spell. And she came up with a learning system called Letterland and these Letterland characters. Some of you may be familiar with them already. I don't know if you've learnt with them when you were younger. We've got Bouncy Ben, Dippy Duck, and my personal favourite, Talking Tess, because my name is Tom. The Letterland characters, I'll just talk about a little bit about the system first so you get an understanding about who we are, and then I'll move on to the tips, which is probably what you're most interested to hear about. But the basic principle is that the Letterland characters provide an explanation to all the sounds of the English language. And in this instance here, we've got the alphabet, and the characters and the stories that relate to them provide an explanation to the letter sounds, but also the letter shapes. So we've got Bouncy Ben, who says his B sound in words, and he has a big blue ball, and he has lots of brothers as well. And if you look at the character, children often have confusion between similar letter shapes like B, D, P, and Q. And we have handwriting verses that again relate to the characters. You brush down Ben's big long ears, go over his face, under his chin, so his face appears. For Dippy Duck, you draw Dippy Duck's back, go under her tum, up to her head, and down you come. So the learning system is based around the characters and the stories. It's very child-friendly, and there's a reason for everything. There's a reason for all this. There's a reason for everything in Letterland. So that's just a quick summary. Once you know all the sounds of the English language, of which there are 44, you can then blend those sounds together to start reading and reading words. So a word like hat, you've got ah and t, hat. And we use Harry Hatman here to explain that. He hates noise. He hops around in Letterland. And of course, we've got Annie Apple and Talking Tess. So that's the broad principle of Letterland. And one of the most exciting things about Letterland is when we go to the more advanced stages of phonics, when the characters interact with each other, there's a phonics story. And so we already know Harry Hatman here. And in a word like shop, it's not s, h, o, p. It's sh, o, p, shop. Now, how is a child supposed to remember that? Well, we have Sammy Snake, and he slithers up behind Harry Hatman, hissing very loudly. And Harry hates noise, of course, so he turns around and he says shh in a word like shop, shoe, or shark. There's lots of opportunities for children to dress up, to play, to have fun. It's very multisensory, and that's in a nutshell what Letterland is. As I said earlier, we sell in over 100 countries around the world, and today I'm going to focus some of my top tips about the USA. That happens to be our largest market at the moment. But as I said earlier, lots of the tips I talk about, they will relate to other countries around the world. So, on to my top 6 tips to exporting. These are all things that we've learned over 45 years of trading, and in particular in the US, we about 5 or 6 years ago, we decided to develop our own US-specific product range, and that's my first tip: is focus on the product and don't be afraid to localize your content, whatever it might be, to the specific market. We were selling our materials and our teachers' guides that were developed for the UK and the US in a small scale, and it wasn't until we actually localized our content and developed our pre-K, kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2 teachers' guides that things really started to take off. It took us a year or two to do that, so don't be afraid to really spend some time. We did a lot of research. We worked with a local partner in the US, a local author, in order to do that. And the result was the content was far more accessible to local teachers. They understood what we were talking about. The other thing that we did as well is we correlated our content to the local curriculum. And in the US, many of you will be familiar with the Common Core. It is essentially a curriculum that is shared across most of the 50 states. And we embedded that into our program. Now, the Common Core is actually at the moment a bit of a hot topic, and some people, some teachers, if you go to a teacher in the US, they will mention the word Common Core, they'll probably either give you a hug or hit you. It's quite a divisive term at the moment. And so if you don't do what we did, which was write into the guide references to the Common Core, a simple correlation to various curriculums will do. You can put it on your website, and that has the added advantage of if things change, curriculums of course change rapidly, you can update your website as opposed to having to rewrite your products. So really take time to focus and localize your product. The other thing that we did, which was probably one of the best strategic moves that we did in the US, was to find what we call internal champions. What do I mean by internal champions? For us, it was teachers. It was people employed by the state, by districts within a state that were employed to train teachers, that were responsible for raising literacy standards within that district or state, and head teachers, principals, superintendents who are in charge of a group of schools. And that takes time. Whilst we were researching, updating our products, localizing our products, we were building relationships with internal champions. And the way you do that is you go to the market. You have to go to the US. It's a little bit easier now because you have Twitter, you have Facebook, you have email. It's much easier to communicate with people, but spend the time to develop those relationships with those internal champions. And one of the reasons why it's so effective is because they will do the work for you. Teachers love listening to other teachers, and in fact it's a much easier sell for a teacher bigging up Letterland or bigging up one of your products than it is you going in and cold calling them. So that was one of the best marketing strategies we ever did. The other benefit of finding an internal champion as well is as you're tailoring your product to the market, they can provide you with really valuable feedback of what types of things you need to do to your product range, your content, that will be accessible to the local market. So the third tip that I would give is, once you have localized your product, once you have found those internal champions and you have started to develop a little bit of a market there, you can't easily sell from the UK. And you're going to have to do one of two things. You're either going to have to incorporate in the US, which is very expensive. You're going to have a large amount of revenue to make that justifiable, or you partner with a third party, which is what we've done and what we're continuing to do, and you find a sales rep force or a distributor that will represent you. And that was crucial for us because we were struggling to keep up with time zones. Simple things like our accent wasn't the same. The British accent only goes, the charm of the British accent only goes a certain way so far. And so having people on the ground to answer practical day-to-day questions was essential. The other thing that I would say about working with partners, in particular sales reps and distributors, and I feel like I can say this because I'm a salesman and I'm in sales myself, but sales reps in particular, they'll want everything for nothing, and don't be afraid to stand your ground, and they'll often ask for exclusivity straight away. And we, for example, we worked with a sales rep 5 or 6 years ago. It was just one person. This is our sales team there at the time, and it took us, we worked with them for 6 months, and there was no exclusive contract at all. After 6 months, we developed a relationship. They proved their worth, and we had some results, and we had something to talk about. And then we gave exclusivity to one state, North Carolina, and moved on to South Carolina, Virginia, the Eastern Seaboard. And only last year, 5 or 6 years on, did we give exclusivity to this sales team for the whole of the United States. So be careful. My fourth tip, once you've developed your sales network and you're making some good ground, is make sure you provide support and make sure that you have a clear strategy for providing support. In our case, that meant provide training for teachers. We're all about teaching English, and it really wasn't enough for us to say, well, okay, we've made a sale, let's move on to another school, let's move on to another district. I was actually at a talk in Dubai last month, and I was listening to a principal of an international US school, and he was giving publishers like myself and educational suppliers some tips of do's and don'ts to selling to schools. And right up there at the top was, don't go into a school, sell something, and then never speak to them ever again. That's the worst thing that companies could have done, in his opinion. And I thought that was really useful advice. For us, in particular, because of what we do, developing a training strategy was extremely important for a number of different reasons. We now have 10 or so independent trainers that go in directly after a school adopts Letterland and will come in a year or two afterwards as well. And training provides a great communication to our customers. It's given us some really good feedback. We've used the information that we've learnt in training to update our product range, and some product ideas have even come from discussions in training sessions. So that's one really good reason to do training from our perspective. The other solid reason was to maintain Letterland fidelity. Now, what do I mean by that? If you just sell a teaching system to a school, they might use it correctly to begin with, but in time, bad habits will creep in. And where we've neglected to have a clear strategy of support and training, we have, in other markets, not the US, we found that our brand reputation becomes diminished, because you get to some teachers start saying, well, hang on a second, this isn't working. We don't like Letterland anymore. And in actual fact, it's not that Letterland isn't working, but it's that they're not using it properly, and that's where training can come in. So training is very important, and make sure you have a clear strategy for providing support after the sale. My fifth tip is don't be afraid to think big. So in 2007, when we were doing a small amount of business in the US, one of our internal champions approached us and said, hey, why don't we approach a local theme park and have a Letterland Day in the theme park? And we sort of said, well, that's a great idea, but good luck with it. And we let them get on with it and said, if you want to try it, then go for it. And they organized it, to our surprise. And they invited local drama students to pretend to be the Letterland characters, and they invited local schools to come along to the event. If we fast forward now to 2015, we had 12,000 attendees come over the course of 6 days at the same theme park. And we've got these lovely professional Letterland costumes here, and it really is a great event. It's a fantastic PR exercise for Letterland, and we never would have imagined that we'd be able to draw that number of people over the course of 6 days. So don't be afraid to think big. My sixth and final tip is work with people like the UKTI. Now, I'm not just saying that because I'm on the UKTI stand here. I really do mean that, and I'll explain exactly why and exactly how UKTI have really helped us to explore export markets in US and also other markets as well. And I want to talk about some of the ways that they've helped us in particular, and I know that they have lots of initiatives that I haven't even used and we haven't used as Letterland, so feel free to talk to someone, a representative afterwards if you've got any questions. But one of the ways that they've helped us is the TAP grants, the Trade Show Access Program. They have been invaluable to us. I mentioned earlier about internal champions going to the US, going to the country and getting on the ground and speaking to people. Using the TAP grants is one way of doing that because it often covers near enough that your stand cost. It doesn't cover your flights or your accommodation, but it goes a long way to helping you speak to people on the ground. So the TAP grants have been very useful. This is a picture from Dubai where we had a grant. The grants vary in size depending on the show. I think between £1,500 and £2,500 available. The other thing that we've taken advantage of in the UKTI are the OMIS reports, the Overseas Market Introduction Service. They can be tailored according to your brief, according to what you want. They'll probably not be very happy with me saying this, but there is an opportunity to negotiate. It's a paid-for service, and I think one of the reasons why you can negotiate is because each business is very different, each market is very different, and it really depends what your requirement is. For us, a good example of this was Brazil. I was recently in Brazil. It's a new market for us, and we actually combined the TAP grant with the OMIS, which is a great combination. It meant that we could attend an education show in Brazil, and through the OMIS we had reports done, we had leads warmed up for us, and our objective was to find a distributor in Brazil. And so the UKTI officer found some potential distributors for us, organised meetings at the show. Some potential distributors couldn't come to the show, and so they organised meetings. This is one example, Pearson. I met with Pearson. We went to their offices. The reports are useful as well, just from a practical point of view. We had meetings across town, and I would never have known how long it took to get from A to B, and so it was really, really useful. So the combination of a TAP grant and OMIS has been invaluable for us, but I know there are lots of other ways that UKTI can help. The other thing that I would say as well is they offer free help as well, free advice. It's free to talk to them, and I've had lots of conversations with various UKTI officers that have given me some really good advice about various export markets. So those are my 6 tips that we've learned in our efforts to grow our market in the US.